The void of space was an ocean of darkness, dotted with stars that shimmered like distant memories. Yet, the silence was shattered by the arrival of the Astralise, an imposing vessel whose sturdy design reflected centuries of refined technology. At the helm, Commander Theron Vake kept his eyes fixed on the holographic projection filling the bridge. His scarred face told stories of battles and decisions that had shaped not only his life, but also the course of the Galactic Union. A message from the Council of Regents lingered in the air, repeating with urgency, "Uncover the secret of the Ascendants before it's too late." Theron clenched his fists as he heard the recording for the 5th time. The Ascendants, an ancient civilization whose legend bordered on the mythical, were known for mastering technologies that transcended the laws of physics. Yet, like many other powers, they vanished millennia ago, leaving only ruins and mysteries behind. Beside him, Lyra Kess, the strategist and his second-in-command, crossed her arms while analyzing the projected data. Her voice was a mix of skepticism and professionalism. "We've pinpointed the destination. A planet called Teleris in the Andrian sector. Nothing but abandoned relics and dust, from what it seems. Relics the Council deems dangerous," added Ivar Tenric, the ship's engineer, while adjusting his instruments. His relaxed tone contrasted with the gravity of the situation, but failed to mask his curiosity. "Have you heard the stories? They say the Ascendants created technology that not only altered reality, but also mirrored the spirit of its user. Sounds exaggerated, but it's fascinating until it destroys whoever tries to manipulate it," Theron said gravely. He knew that legends often held seeds of truth and danger. "Prepare for descent. We need to uncover what's truly left of this extinct people before others do." The Astralise pierced through the planet's atmosphere with a deafening roar, breaking through the cloud barrier to reveal the world below. Teleris was a surprising contrast. Lush forest stretched as far as the eye could see, interrupted by majestic mountains and ancient ruins overgrown with moss. The planet seemed to slumber, but there was something unsettling about its calm. "Scans confirm no interstellar activity," Lyra reported, adjusting her visor. "No signs of intelligent life aside from the local fauna. That doesn't mean this place is unguarded," Theron replied as the ship landed smoothly in a clearing. When the ramp opened, the wind carried the scent of unfamiliar vegetation and the distant sound of a river. Theron was the first to step onto the ground, followed closely by Lyra and Ivar. The ruins ahead were massive, a blend of stone and metal glinting under the filtered sunlight. An obelisk, partially buried, rose among the trees, its surfaces covered in inscriptions that seemed to shift form when observed for too long. Ivar approached, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "These markings, it's almost as if they're alive. They pulse like integrated circuits, but they're entirely alien." Lyra remained alert, gripping her weapon tightly. "You've heard the stories, haven't you? The Ascendants were masters of blending the physical with the spiritual. This place is likely filled with traps and secrets that were never meant to be uncovered." Before Theron could respond, a hidden panel on the obelisk glowed with an intense blue light. A hologram began to materialize, forming an indistinct but humanoid figure. Its voice echoed like a calm thunder, filling the air with gravity. "Travelers," the hologram said, "you have arrived at what remains of our creation. Be warned, what we protect here is not just our legacy, it is our failure." The team fell silent, absorbing the cryptic words. For Theron, one thing was clear. Whatever was hidden on Teleris was not to be treated as just another valuable artifact. "This is not just a warning," he said, his jaw tight. "It's a promise of something far greater than we imagined." The hologram disappeared as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving the team in the almost oppressive silence of the ruins. Theron glanced around, taking in the magnitude of the place. The words of the message still echoed in his mind. Our creation was not just our legacy, it was our mistake. "Legacy and mistake," Lyra murmured, adjusting her visor to analyze the nearby inscriptions. "That doesn't sound like something we should awaken." Her voice carried a warning tone, but the strategist's typical skepticism seemed tinged with a trace of apprehension. "That's why we're here," Theron replied, the firmness of a commander used to navigating uncertainties evident in his voice. "If there's something on this planet that could fall into the wrong hands, we need to understand what it is and how to stop it." Ivar, already kneeling near a panel embedded at the obelisk's base, connected his analysis equipment to the glowing circuits. "This system is incredibly advanced," he remarked, almost speaking to himself. "It's active, but it's as if it's waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Lyra asked, her grip tightening on her weapon. "For us? Or perhaps for someone who can prove they're worthy," Ivar replied, adjusting the analyzer's controls. The device began emitting rhythmic sounds, like a distant pulse. Before anyone could speak further, the obelisk glowed again, projecting a sequence of images into the air. Maps, symbols, and patterns floated, shifting rapidly as the team struggled to process the information. This is a map," Ivar said, his eyes fixed on the projection. He pointed to a pulsating marker to the northeast. "I think we've found our next destination." Theron nodded, his mind already outlining the next steps. "Then we can't waste time. Lyra, scout the path ahead. Ivar, prepare the equipment. I want us ready for anything." The journey through the forest surrounding the ruins was arduous. Towering trees formed a canopy so dense it almost blocked out the sunlight, while the ground, tangled with treacherous roots, made every step a challenge. The air seemed to hum with an energy none of them could explain. "This planet isn't just an abandoned piece of land," Lyra said, keeping her weapon at the ready as she surveyed their surroundings. "It's like it's alive, or maybe resonating with the Ascendant's creation," Ivar suggested, jotting down notes on his device. They were known for blending science and spirit. Perhaps Teleris is proof of that. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a metallic sound. A faint glow appeared among the trees, accompanied by the rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps. "Something's approaching," Lyra murmured, moving to cover the rear. "Everyone ready?" From the vegetation emerged a tall, imposing creature, a fusion of metal and organic matter. Its eyes glowed with an intense blue light, and its limbs morphed into gleaming blades. Without hesitation, it lunged at the team. "Fire!" Theron shouted, dodging the first strike as he fired his weapon. Gunfire echoed through the forest, but the enemy was quick and seemed to anticipate their movements. Lyra maintained her usual precision, aiming for weaknesses in the creature's defenses, while Ivar hastily improvised an electromagnetic device. "Hold it off for a few more seconds," the engineer shouted, frantically connecting wires and adjusting controls. The creature lunged again but was intercepted by a direct hit from Ivar's device, which emitted a pulsating wave, temporarily disabling its systems. "Now!" Theron ordered. Lyra fired a precise shot, hitting the glowing core in the creature's chest and bringing it down with a heavy thud. Breathing heavily, the trio cautiously approached the fallen body. "This wasn't just a common defense mechanism," Theron said, examining the details of the defeated foe. "It was a machine built to protect something. We're on the right path." After a brief rest, the team continued toward the map's marker. Each step seemed to take them deeper into a mystery that defied simple explanations. Finally, they arrived at what appeared to be the epicenter of all the energy they had sensed from the start, a massive structure partially buried in the ground. "Welcome to the true legacy of the Ascendants," Ivar said in awe as he studied the intricate, glowing architecture. Theron, however, knew this was only the beginning. The hologram had warned of dangers, and he had no doubt they would face them. The semi-buried structure was a breathtaking sight. Its exterior seemed to pulse with a soft, almost organic light, and the inscriptions covering its walls appeared to dance in the ambient glow. Theron, Lyra, and Ivar approached cautiously, each step heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. "The energy here feels different," Ivar said, examining the readings on his analyzer. "It's not just static or geothermal. It feels interactive, Lyra's eyes scanned the markings on the structure's exterior, her hand steady on her weapon. If it's interactive, that means it reacts to our presence. And considering what we faced earlier, I wouldn't bet on it being friendly. Theron nodded, his sharp commander's gaze analyzing the surroundings. If this structure was designed by the Ascendants, it likely holds as much danger as knowledge. We move with caution. They found an entrance partially obstructed by debris and vegetation that had grown over the centuries. While Ivar worked to reawaken the door mechanisms by dismantling a side panel, Theron and Lyra maintained a vigilant watch. The sound of ancient gears grinding into motion broke the silence, and the doors creaked open, revealing a dark, deep corridor. "Welcome to the Ascendant's fortress," Lyra murmured, adjusting her flashlight to illuminate the interior. The light revealed walls covered with faintly glowing symbols that seemed to react to the team's presence. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere grew oppressive. The air felt charged with an invisible energy, and the floor emitted a soft hum with every step. "This place is still active," Ivar said, inspecting the devices embedded in the walls. Even after centuries of abandonment, they soon entered a wide, circular chamber. At its center floated a translucent sphere above an ornate pedestal. Currents of light flowed through the sphere, shifting colors and intensities in a hypnotic display. "The core," Theron said, approaching cautiously. "This is what we were looking for." Suddenly, a holographic projection formed above the pedestal. It was the same indistinct figure they had seen before, but its presence now felt more commanding. "You have made it this far," the voice boomed, reverberating through the chamber. "But only those who understand the purpose of this place may proceed." "Purpose?" Lyra asked cautiously. "Explain." The projection ignored her question and continued. "The core is not a weapon or a power source. It is an amplifier. It reflects and amplifies what lies within those who use it. Its true nature is a test, not a reward." Theron exchanged glances with Lyra and Ivar. "A test of what?" he asked, his voice steady. "The essence of who you are," the hologram replied. "Courage, sacrifice, understanding. These are the keys to unlocking this place's true potential. But remember, those who seek control without balance find only ruin." Before they could respond, the ground began to quake. Glowing runes appeared on the walls, and the chamber filled with an intense hum. "This doesn't look good," Ivar said, frantically checking his analyzer. "Something's coming." Mechanical sentinels emerged from the chamber walls, resembling the one they had faced earlier, but in greater numbers and armed with more advanced weaponry. "Automated defenders," Lyra said, readying her weapon. "Of course, it wouldn't be that easy." "Defensive formation," Theron shouted as the sentinels advanced. Gunfire erupted in the chamber as the team fought to hold back the attackers. The machines were fast and coordinated, forcing the team to adapt on the fly. "Ivar, we need something to disable them," Theron shouted, dodging an attack. "I'm on it," the engineer replied, connecting his device to a nearby panel. "Just give me a few more seconds." As Lyra provided cover with precise shots, Theron engaged a sentinel in close combat. His movements were sharp and calculated, but the relentless assault was taking its toll. Finally, Ivar activated his device, releasing an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the sentinels, giving Lyra the opportunity to destroy the remaining ones. When the last sentinel fell, silence returned to the chamber. "If this was just the initial test, I don't want to imagine the next one," Lyra said, wiping sweat from her brow. The hologram reappeared, its form now clearer and more human-like in its expressions. "You have demonstrated courage, but courage without understanding is mere recklessness. The core tests more than strength. It measures the balance between who you are and what you seek to achieve." "Then tell us how to pass the test," Theron said firmly, though his voice carried a trace of exasperation. "The test is not something I can grant," the hologram replied. "It is intrinsic. For each of you, it will be different. But remember, the core amplifies who you are. Your essence will determine the outcome." The projection disappeared once more, plunging the chamber into dim light. Theron turned to Lyra and Ivar. "We're dealing with something far greater than we imagined," he said, "and we can't afford to fail." As the team prepared to move forward, the core began to pulse with an even stronger energy, almost as if it were alive. The structure seemed to react to their advance, and the tension grew with every step. The deafening roar of ships piercing the atmosphere filled the skies above the ascendant structure. Caden's fleet arrived in full force, their metallic hulls reflecting the light of storms forming around the site. Inside the structure, Theron, Lyra, and Ivar felt the vibration of the machinery, as though the building itself was warning them of imminent danger. "Sensors show at least 24 ships, and I'm detecting ground movement," Ivar said, alarmed as he analyzed the data on his portable device. "They've deployed troops to surround the perimeter." "Caden knows we're here," Lyra replied, adjusting her energy shield bracelet. "He won't stop until he takes the core or destroys everything." Theron remained silent for a moment, assessing the situation. He knew the core was more than just a relic of power. It was an amplifier of essence, capable of turning ambition into something monumental or catastrophic. "We won't let him in," he said, his voice resolute. "This place is our last chance to stop Caden. We must defend the core at all costs." As Lyra and Ivar took their positions, the structure began to glow more brightly. The walls vibrated softly, and intricate runes lit up in rhythmic patterns. "It looks like the structure is activating its own defenses," Ivar observed. "But I don't know how long it will hold." Outside, Caden's first wave of troops advanced. Bipedal robots and heavily armed soldiers approached the main entrance, while smaller ships flew overhead, searching for weaknesses in the defensive barrier. Caden, aboard his flagship, watched the assault with a cold smile. "They stand no chance. Prepare the second wave. I want that core intact." Inside, Theron coordinated the team. "Ivar, keep the structure's defenses running. Use the internal systems to delay them as much as possible. Lyra, cover the west entrance. I'll handle the main one. We need to buy time to figure out how to seal the core permanently." The battle began with an explosion. The structure's energy barriers repelled the first wave of attacks, but not without strain. "Their disruptors are working fast," Lyra shouted over the communicator, firing at a robot that had partially breached the force field. "We need to strengthen these defenses, or they'll break through before we can do anything." "Ivar, now would be a good time for some improvisation," Theron said, taking down an enemy unit with precise shots. "I'm on it," the engineer replied, frantically connecting his devices to the structure's panels. "I think I can redirect energy from the inner layers to the shields, but it might overload the system." "Do it," Theron ordered, dodging an explosion while firing at another invading squad. "If we lose these barriers, we won't get a second chance." Meanwhile, outside, Caden grew impatient. "They're resisting more than expected," he told a subordinate. "Prepare the heavy artillery. Destroy the structure if we can't capture it." Back inside, the fight intensified. Lyra, moving with lethal precision, took down invaders one by one, but the enemy numbers seemed endless. "This is getting unsustainable," she shouted, retreating to reload. "We need a solution now." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Theron made a decision. "Ivar, activate the protocol the core mentioned, primordial synchronization. If it amplifies who we are, we need to use it against Caden." "Are you sure about this?" Ivar asked hesitantly. "We still don't fully understand what it does." "We don't have a choice," Theron replied. "Activate it. It's this or we lose everything." Ivar sighed but followed the command. As soon as he entered the sequence, the core began to pulse intensely, its light filling the main chamber. The structure responded, emitting a wave of energy that temporarily disabled Caden's troops. "It worked!" Lyra shouted, taking advantage of the moment to eliminate the incapacitated enemies. But the relief was short-lived. The hologram reappeared, its presence now more imposing. "You have activated primordial synchronization," it said, "but this requires a sacrifice. The core can only be sealed through essence fusion." One of you must become part of it. What? Lyra exclaimed, spinning to face the hologram. That wasn't in the manual. Theron clenched his fists, feeling the weight of responsibility. If that's what it takes to stop Caden, then I'll do it. Not so fast, Commander, Lyra interrupted. You're the head of this operation. Without you, we have no plan, no leadership. If someone has to make the sacrifice, it's me. This isn't up for debate, Theron replied firmly. The decision is mine. Before the argument could escalate, Ivar intervened. Wait, maybe there's a way to share the load between us. Primordial synchronization is about balance, right? If we all connect to the core, we might be able to seal it without losing anyone. The hologram nodded. This is possible, but it requires absolute harmony. Any doubt or emotional instability could lead to fatal consequences. Let's try, Theron said decisively. Everyone around the core. The three of them positioned themselves around the sphere, placing their hands on its translucent surface. A wave of energy enveloped them, and their minds were transported to an empty space filled with symbols and images of their own memories, fears, and hopes. This is the test, the hologram said. You must face your truths and maintain balance. Only then will the core be sealed. As they faced their individual trials, Caden launched his final assault outside. But before he could breach the structure, a burst of light erupted from the core, disabling all his forces and forcing his fleet to retreat. When the light faded, Theron, Lyra, and Ivar were on their knees, exhausted but alive. The core now glowed serenely, sealed and inaccessible to anyone who might misuse it. We did it, Lyra said breathlessly. But that was close. Theron helped her to her feet, gazing at the core with reverence. Caden has been repelled, but he'll be back. We need to take what we've learned to the other cores before he can regroup. As the team returned to their ship, the core emitted a final message, recorded directly onto Ivar's devices. You have passed the test, but the true challenge lies ahead. Protect the balance, or the galaxy will face the same fate as the Ascendants. Theron's ship sliced through the void of space, distancing itself from the planet where they had just repelled Caden. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of what they had experienced. The core was secure, sealed to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, but the cost of their victory was clear. Caden wouldn't give up so easily. In the command room, Theron reviewed the data transmitted by the core during its activation. Holographic projections swirled around him, displaying images of the Ascendant civilization, floating cities, awe-inspiring technologies, and a harmonious coexistence of science and spirituality. Yet, amidst this splendor, ominous glimpses of destruction emerged, a stark reminder of what happens when balance is lost. The Ascendants were fascinating, Ivar said, stepping into the room. They didn't just master energy and matter, they understood how our intentions shape our creations. It's like an emotional science. Lyra, seated near the main viewport watching the stars drift by, replied, and that's what destroyed them. They became so obsessed with controlling everything that they lost control of themselves. She turned to Theron. We're following the same path, aren't we? Theron remained silent for a moment before responding. Not if we're willing to learn from their mistakes. He gestured to the holograms. They left these cores as warnings, but also as guides. We can't ignore what they represent. Ivar moved to the central console, analyzing the latest data. There's something interesting here. The core left us coordinates for another structure. But it's more than that, it also unlocked information about a galactic pattern. The cores are interconnected, forming a network that monitors energy imbalances across the cosmos. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You're saying these cores aren't just relics? They're still active, somehow overseeing the galaxy? Exactly, Ivar replied. But here's the problem. Caden must have figured that out too. If he can control just one core long enough, he could use it to locate and access all the others. He's not just after power, he's after the key to the entire network. Tension hung thick in the air. Theron looked at the holographic projection of their next destination. Where's the location? A planet called Drathis, Ivar answered. Hostile environment. toxic deserts, sandstorms loaded with radiation, and higher than normal gravity. The structure seems to be buried, but there are signs Caden has already sent probes there. Lyra sighed. Of course, it couldn't be easy, but at least we know where we're going. She stood, securing her weapons. Let's get ready. If Caden's already there, we'll need a better plan than just holding the line. Before they departed, the hologram from the previous core reappeared, its figure more vivid than ever. You are heading toward the next test, it said, its voice resonating through the chamber. But beware, Drathis holds the most unstable core. It was sealed with the deepest fears of the Ascendants. To access it, you will need to confront your own fears. Lyra frowned. Another emotional test? I'm starting to think these Ascendants were obsessed with cheap philosophy. It's not that simple, Theron replied. These tests aren't just about us. They also ensure no one uses these cores without being ready to bear their burden. And frankly, I'd rather face this than let Caden win. The journey to Drathis was marked by reflective silence. Each team member knew they were approaching a challenge that went beyond physical strength. When the ship entered orbit around the planet, the sight that greeted them was imposing. Storms raging across the surface, winds capable of tearing apart entire structures, and a desolate landscape of orange and red hues. I'm detecting signs of activity, Ivar reported. Caden is already here. He stationed an orbital fleet and sent ground teams. They seem to be trying to break into the structure. Then we don't have time to waste, Theron said, adjusting his armor. Lyra, lead the distraction team. Ivar, you're with me to locate the core. The plan was risky but necessary. While Lyra and a squad engaged Caden's forces, Theron and Ivar would infiltrate the structure using the data provided by the previous core. The trek across the desert was brutal. The increased gravity made every step an effort, and the radiation required them to stay inside protective suits. Ivar said, trying to lighten the mood, the Ascendants really knew how to pick hiding spots for their ancient toys? Or maybe they knew no one should find them, Theron replied grimly. At last, they reached the entrance. It was a massive corroded metal door marked with runes that seemed to vibrate with energy. This is it, Ivar said, but opening it is going to be a nightmare. The energy is completely unstable. As he worked on the panel, the sound of metallic footsteps echoed behind them. Theron turned swiftly, weapon raised. Emerging from the desert was an advanced squad of Caden's soldiers, accompanied by towering machines. We've got company, he said. Ivar, how much time do you need? More than I have, Ivar replied, sweating under the pressure. The battle was fierce. Theron used the uneven terrain to his advantage, picking off enemies one by one while shielding Ivar. We're running out of time, he shouted as more forces closed in. Suddenly, the panel emitted a click, and the door began to open. I've got it, Ivar exclaimed, but this is going to draw more of them. It doesn't matter, Theron said, pulling Ivar inside. Seal it behind us and get ready. The real fight is about to begin. Inside, the structure pulsed with a dense, oppressive energy. The hologram reappeared, clearer and more commanding. You have faced the initial challenges, it said, but Drathis does not test only courage or sacrifice. This core reflects the deepest truths of who you are. Are you ready for that? Theron clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the words. We don't have a choice, he said. We'll find out who we truly are and make sure Caden never gets the chance. The interior of the Drathis structure was unlike anything Theron and Ivar had encountered before. Unlike the previous core, which emanated a sense of balance and order, this one pulsed with an unsettling, almost sentient energy. Lights flickered across the metallic walls, forming unstable patterns as if the structure were adapting to their presence. Definitely not welcoming, Ivar remarked, his eyes fixed on a nearby panel. The readings here are chaotic. This core is literally on the brink of instability. Theron scanned the room, keeping his weapon ready. The hologram said this core tests our deepest truths. Be ready for anything. As they ventured deeper, the corridors narrowed, and a creeping sense of claustrophobia set in. Indistinct sounds echoed around them, as though something was shifting in the shadows. "This feels like one of those old horror movies," Ivar joked, trying to ease the tension. "Let's just hope there aren't monsters crawling on the ceiling." Theron didn't reply. He felt something different here, something pulling him inward, as if the structure itself was delving into his memories, unearthing fears and doubts he had long buried. Finally, they reached a vast chamber, at the center of which floated the core. Unlike the others, this one was a black sphere surrounded by currents of energy pulsing in ominous shades of red and purple. Each pulse seemed to resonate in the air, creating an invisible pressure that made breathing difficult. "This is," Ivar began, but his voice was cut off by a tremor that rippled through the ground. Suddenly, the hologram appeared again, more vivid than ever. "You have arrived at the heart of Drathis," the figure said, its voice echoing through the chamber. "This core reflects the deepest essence of the Ascendants and those who dare to approach it. It amplifies not only your courage, but also your fears. To access it, you must face what you hide from yourselves." Before they could respond, the room began to change. The walls vanished, replaced by an infinite void. Theron and Ivar were separated, each enveloped in an individual projection. Theron found himself on a battlefield, reminiscent of the many he had led throughout his career. But something was off. The sounds of weapons were muffled, and the figures around him were blurred, like distant shadows. At the center of the field, he saw a younger version of himself, shouting orders as he led his soldiers. Suddenly, the shadows materialized into familiar faces, men and women he had lost in past missions. They stared at him accusingly, their voices echoing all around. "You sacrificed us," one of the figures shouted. "Why? There was another way. You chose victory over our lives," another said, their expression of pain searing into Theron. "I did what had to be done," Theron replied, but his voice sounded weak, even to himself. The figures continued to close in, each one bringing memories of difficult decisions and losses he had never fully reconciled. Then a different voice echoed, his own, older and steadier. "You cannot change the past," the voice said, "but you can learn from it. Carrying guilt doesn't honor the dead. Living with purpose does." Theron closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, the figures were gone. In their place, he saw his current team, Lyra, Ivar, and the others who trusted him. "I can't fail them," he said to himself, "and I won't." Ivar found himself in a futuristic laboratory, surrounded by advanced equipment and holograms displaying complex formulas. He immediately recognized the place. It was the research center where he had begun his career. But instead of being a hub of progress, the environment was chaotic. Alarms blared, and scientists ran in panic. At the center of the room, Ivar saw a younger version of himself, manipulating a device that emitted an intense light. He knew this moment well. It was the scene of his greatest failure, when an experiment had spiraled out of control and caused a devastating explosion. "You wanted to be the brightest," a voice said beside him. He turned to see an indistinct figure, a representation of his own conscience. "You wanted to prove you were better than everyone else. And look what happened." "I didn't know," Ivar began, but the figure interrupted him. "You knew it was risky, but you ignored the warnings because you wanted the glory." Ivar felt the weight of guilt growing inside him. But then he remembered everything he had learned since that day. "Yes, I made mistakes," he said firmly, "but those mistakes shaped who I am, and I won't let them define me." With those words, the chaotic laboratory dissolved, and he found himself back in the chamber. Theron and Ivar reunited in the chamber, breathless but resolute. The hologram reappeared, its expression one of approval. "You have faced your fears and accepted your truths," it said. "That is what makes you worthy to access this core." The black sphere began to glow, its currents dissolving as a radiant energy filled the room. Data streamed into their devices, revealing the locations of the remaining cores and the final secrets of the Ascendants. But before they could celebrate, the sound of explosions echoed through the structure. "Caden is here," Theron said, adjusting his weapon. He's come to finish what he started. The structure on Drathis trembled as Caden's forces drew near. Explosions reverberated through the walls as the enemy fleet bombarded the surface, preparing for an all-out invasion. Theron, Ivar, and Lyra, who had finally reached the core with her team, stood together in the chamber's center. The pulsing energy of the core filled the air, like a colossal heartbeat driving the fate of everyone present. Caden's brought everything he's got, Lyra reported, scanning data on her visor. We're surrounded, and he's leading the charge himself. That only proves we're on the right track, Theron replied, adjusting his weapon. He turned to Ivar. Do we have anything useful from the core? Ivar nodded, but his expression was tense. The data is clear. This core and the others are interconnected. If we fully activate this one, it'll send out a pulse that disables invasive technology over a massive radius. But there's a cost? What cost? Lyra asked, already expecting the worst. The core's systems will overload, Ivar explained. The resulting explosion will destroy everything on this planet, including us. It's a sacrificial move. Theron was silent, processing the choice. Lyra, ever pragmatic, spoke bluntly. Is there another option? I'm not ready to die here if we can find another way. Ivar glanced at the core, hesitating. Maybe. If we could trick Caden into retreating or dividing his forces, we might be able to use the core without fully activating it. But that requires time. Time we don't have? Then we'll make time, Theron said firmly. Lyra, take your team and hold the hunters off. Don't let them get here. Ivar and I will do whatever it takes to prepare the core. Outside, Caden's forces descended like a swarm, their ships blotting out the sky as mechanized troops advanced on the ground. Lyra led a daring offensive, using the terrain and the structure's natural defenses to delay the invaders. Hold your positions, she commanded, her voice steady as she fired at the enemy lines. From his flagship, Caden observed the battle with a cold glare. They're holding too well, he muttered. They know they're protecting something important. Bring me the core and eliminate all resistance. Inside the structure, Theron and Ivar worked frantically to decipher the core systems. Each pulse from the black sphere seemed to sync with the chaos outside, as if the core itself were responding to the imminent confrontation. We're close, Ivar said, sweat dripping as he manipulated the controls. But this is draining energy from the structure itself. It won't hold much longer. Eventually, Caden's forces broke through Lyra's defensive line, forcing her and her team to retreat to the chamber's entrance. Theron, they're coming straight for you, she warned over the communicator. Get ready for a fight. Theron clenched his fists. Ivar, how much time do we need? 5 more minutes, Ivar replied, eyes glued to the panel. Whatever happens, just keep them back. As the chamber doors opened, Caden entered, flanked by his soldiers. His imposing figure, clad in gleaming black armor, exuded confidence as he smiled cruelly. Theron, he said in a low, triumphant tone, did you really think you could stop the inevitable? I thought I could stop you from destroying everything that matters, Theron replied, stepping between Caden and the core. Caden chuckled darkly. You're fighting against progress. These cores are the key to absolute domination. Negotiate with me now, and I might spare your team. Theron raised his weapon, resolute. I don't negotiate with tyrants. The fight began. Caden's soldiers surged forward, but Theron and Lyra fought fiercely, their determination fueled by the stakes of the moment. Ivar, under immense pressure, continued working on the controls, creating barricades, and issuing quick commands to slow the enemy's advance. As the battle intensified, Theron realized that Caden's forces were unrelenting. The only way to turn the tide was to take drastic action. He looked at the core, its pulses growing faster, as though resonating with the escalating conflict. Ivar, Theron said quietly but firmly, activate the full pulse. Now. Theron, that will. Now. Theron shouted, firing at the advancing enemies. Ivar hesitated but complied. He entered the final command, and the core began to shine with a blinding intensity. The chamber filled with a resonant hum, growing louder with each second. Everyone, get out! Theron ordered. Lyra tried to protest, but Theron was resolute. "Go, Lyra! Protect the team. That's an order." With tears in her eyes, Lyra retreated, leading the remaining survivors out of the structure. Caden, realizing what was happening, tried to reach the core, but Theron intercepted him. "You won't escape this," Caden growled. "Neither will you," Theron replied, launching himself at his enemy. The resulting explosion was monumental. A wave of energy surged across Drathis, disabling all invasive technology and obliterating Caden's forces. The structure collapsed, entombing the core and everyone inside. From the safety of orbit, Lyra and Ivar watched the planet in silence, struggling to process Theron's sacrifice. He knew it was the only way, Ivar said quietly. Lyra nodded, her eyes burning with determination. "He trusted us to continue, and that's exactly what we'll do." Back at their base, the team analyzed the data recovered from the core. The information revealed a clear pattern. The cores were part of a larger system designed to maintain balance in the galaxy, while also testing those who sought power. "The responsibility is ours now," Lyra said, taking command. "Caden may be gone, but others will come. We'll make sure this legacy doesn't fall into the wrong hands." As their ship set course for the next destination, Theron's words echoed in their minds. True power lies in understanding that it must be used with balance and purpose. Protecting that is our duty. Though the fight was far from over, the team carried the knowledge of the Ascendants and the example of Theron's sacrifice. With this, they were more determined than ever to safeguard the galaxy and ensure that the Ascendant legacy endured.